Hello, Ruth. Thank you for joining us. One of the phrases that you came up with very challengingly in your talk was about the descending Christ. I wonder if you could just tell us a bit more about how you see that.
So I can't claim it as my phrase. It is the phrase of my good friend, Dr Matthew Russell, who ran a church that some people in the study I did of life post-release in faith communities, they went to his church. And when I went to speak to him about his church and how he ran it, he spoke to me about this theology of the descending Christ. And what he talked about was the fact that a lot of churches want to live in the theology of the ascending Christ, want to live in the happiness and the transformation and the good things. But oftentimes he says that where Christ is in people's hells, that Christ descended into hell before he rose into heaven. And I think, criminologically speaking, we've been talking about roots out of crime today. We know some things about roots out of crime. One is that most people who commit criminal offences move away from them over their life course. And the second thing we know is that most people do that on their own initiative. So there is an academic called Professor Sir Tony Bottoms, and he writes a chapter reviewing all the research around this, and he starts it by saying, if a man from Mars came down to Earth, he would say, if these are two criminological facts, then what on earth are you doing in your criminal justice system? Because actually what we know is that if we can come alongside people in their hells, in the moments when life is difficult, that people want to move away from offending, and that they can find ways to do it if we could listen, and if we can be with people in those difficult moments, there might be a chance of transforming them into something different. But I think often, whether it's theology in churches, whether it's universities, whether it's in our individual lives, we are reluctant to do that. So I think that's something of what my good friend Matt Russell meant when he talked about the theology of the descending Christ.
Thank you very much. One of the questions that people have come up with today is, if church wants to be a part of transforming people in their lives, what does it need to become? Or what does it need to be?
If a church wants to be transforming, probably I'd say a church needs to be transformed, I think. So maybe I would say two things, more pragmatically, is that probably it needs to be humble, which is part of being transformed, and it probably needs to be prepared. You don't tend to achieve transformation without preparation. I'm currently training for a run. We run, I should say this because it's going to go online, but we run every year now. Last year I ran for the first time ever. This year I'm running for the second time ever to raise money for our students who have been in prison so that they can pay the bus fares to come to events we put on, because they might not have money for those things that it's hard to get grants and funding for. But I'm saying all this because I think I don't decide I'm going to run a race having never run one before and then do it. If I want to be transformed from a non-runner into a runner, which is taking place very slowly, what I need to do is get prepared. So I found out what running involves. I downloaded the app. I've done some training routinely, and I've taken advice from people who know. And I've got people around me who are good runners, who know about running. So there's a sense sometimes, I think, that faith communities have excellent motivations, but perhaps not much of a clue about what they're doing or how to do it. And there are some excellent criminal justice services, there are some excellent community services, there are lots of people around who can do some very good things. It was making me think of the Welcome Directory, which is an organisation I've been involved in. They run a course which I have helped them to design based around research about what it would look like for faith communities to support people well post-release. There was a training course that faith communities could do. As a minimum, I would say that. So, yes, 1, expect to be transformed. 2, be humble. 3, get prepared.
Thank you. Many people will have heard of the term of restorative justice. What do you think is the place of restorative justice in your way of thinking about things?
Restorative justice and roots out of crime. Yeah, it's interesting because restorative justice is often used in terms of responses to crime, And there is some good research evidence around its role there, both in terms of positive outcomes for people who've been victims of crime and in terms of positive outcomes for people who have committed criminal offences. I think in terms of a place for restorative justice, it's making me think of, there was one of our Home Secretaries once, maybe it was Ken Clarke, or similar to our Minister of Justice now, and he said, when you think about imprisonment and criminal justice, think, what would you want it to be like for your child? I guess what I'm thinking is, what would I want it to be like for me? And I'm thinking, what's the place of restorative justice? Well, if I have to face justice for wrongdoing, I'm not sure I'd want to face any other kind of justice. So surely, for the church, and theologically speaking, restorative justice would be at the heart of everything. And what that means in practice, I think, can be fairly challenging. Yeah. But maybe the church could be a political voice for more restorative justice in our criminal justice system overall.
Thank you. And finally, a question about prayer. One or two have spoken of the challenges of being persistent in prayer, especially when, the people that they're praying for haven't necessarily come up trumps in the way that they would have been hoping for as a result of their prayers. How important do you think that sort of sense of being persistent is really, in our devotional lives?
I keep praying for that winning lottery ticket and it just doesn't transpire. Yeah. So I think if I go to criminological evidence again, I have said we know people move away from crime over their life course, and we know that often they do that on their own initiative. We also know that people fail. People who are moving away from crime fail. It is not a straight road. It's a little bit like a diet, if you've ever been on one. I might want to stop eating chocolate, and I might reduce my chocolate consumption, but there might be a point at which I mess up. So persistence and standing alongside people in failure and continuing to speak hope in those difficult and challenging moments, I think could be really important. So I guess if we think about prayer as an attitude of the mind, as a spirit of engagement, as a motivating force for action, as a plea to divine powers for good things for people, then persistence would have some good criminological evidence as something that would be very important to supporting people, even when it looks like your prayers perhaps aren't working in the way that you think that they should. Maybe we don't know everything, maybe we just have to keep pushing for the good.
Ruth, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.